there's a lot of misinformation about what's happening here in the Middle East. And the reason there's so much misinformation is because people look at the conflict from a political point of view. A lot of people will explain to you that this is a conflict about land, that if we just give up land or divide land or give away land, then we can find a political, peaceful solution. And it's not the case. Since 1911, we've divided the land 22 times, and it's brought nothing but death and destruction to the people of Israel and the people around us. And the reason is because the real conflict here is a biblical conflict. And the fact that it's a biblical conflict is what makes this work, the work of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus here in the Knesset, the work of the Israel Allies Foundation around the world, so crucial in this battle. And it's also the reason why we're starting finally, because of the Trump administration and the people who understand these issues, we're finally starting to win this battle. And so I want to go back to the basis of why Jews and Christians are coming together around the world in an unprecedented burst of activity, and why, for the first time, we're seeing the success of this new cooperation, this new relationship in the 21st century between Jews and Christians. In order to understand that, you have to understand the biblical context, and that comes from one source, that's the Bible. And in the Bible, we learn about many different prophecies. And I'm not sure how familiar all of you are with your Bible. I know that Coach Godfrey is very impressively adept with the books of the prophets. But there were two prophecies that were made a long time ago that really, when you put side by side, didn't make much sense. And that was first the prophecy that the Jewish people were going to be kicked out of the land of Israel. They were going to be sent to the four corners of the earth. They were going to be made a curse among the nations. That was one of the prophecies. And the second prophecy was that the same people are going to be gathered from the four corners of the earth, brought back to the same geographic location, and be made a light unto the nations. So if you put these two prophecies side by side, they don't make any sense. Because if you take a people and you send them to the far corners of the earth, you separate them, you make them a curse among the nations, that's the end of the people. They lose their religion, their culture, their language, their heritage. That's how you get rid of a people. But to have that same people come back to the same geographic location from all the four corners of the earth, from the north, from the south, from the east, and the west, on the wings of eagles, or airplanes as we call them today, in exactly the same way God said that they would do it, well, that's a mathematical impossibility. But that's, of course, what we got to witness in our generation, or if not our parents' generation. We got to see the Jewish people who survived the Romans and the Greeks and the Mesopotamians and the Spanish Inquisition and the Crusades and the Holocaust come back to the land of Israel exactly the way God said they would over 2,500 years ago. And that one fulfillment of prophecy created a domino effect of prophecy after prophecy being fulfilled right before our very eyes. One of the things I would recommend to all of you, especially the younger people here, because it's the most exciting thing, is when you get home, read the whole books of the prophets from the Bible again, because you've actually witnessed dozens of prophecies right before your very eyes. I mean, you've actually got to see it happen being here in the land of Israel. But let's look at a few of them. Let's look at some of them, just the big ones that you can point to. One of the big ones is that the prophecy that the deserts one day would bloom. You have to understand that this land was nothing but desert and swamp. Nothing bloomed here. There was nothing that could bloom here. But of course, today we're the largest exporter of fruits, vegetables, and flowers in the Middle East. If you drive around Israel, you'll see the forestry, the rich, lush foliage all across the country. That was a promise and a prophecy by God, that when the Jewish people return to the land, the blood of the land will rise to the cheek and give off fruits and vegetables once again. The fact that we made the deserts bloom is a crazy miracle. That prophecy 2,005 years ago saying the desert's going to bloom made no sense. By definition, a desert couldn't bloom. That's what makes it a desert. It's like saying one day the sun would melt. But of course now you can see it. And in fact, not only has it bloomed, we produce the best produce in the world. We export flowers to Holland. We beat France in wine tasting competitions. And 70 years ago, this place was just a desolate, dry, nothing place. But it also became a light unto the nations, as we said we would. You know, the majority of the technologies you take for granted in the 21st century come from this little country no bigger than the size of New Jersey. The cell phone, the laptop, text messaging, answering machine, the CAT scan, drip irrigation systems that allow us to grow fruits and vegetables in the sand. Desalinization, it all comes from Israel. You know, we're the only country in the world that made rainwater pretty much irrelevant. Over 50% of our drinking water comes from the ocean. We separate the water from the salt, we drink the water, and we sell the salt. We're literally able to be self-sustainable just from our technology. I mean, a lot of people, I don't know, you guys are too young for this, but in the 80s and 90s when I grew up, there were always Sally Struthers on TV saying, you got to help Kenya and Ethiopia, there's no food, there's famine there. You don't see those commercials anymore because we gave them our drip irrigation system. They have plenty of food now. In fact, Kenya, the desert of Kenya, is the #1 exporter of flowers in the world today through drip irrigation system. We've changed the world for the better through our technology. You being here is a fulfillment of prophecy. The idea that one day nations will come up to Jerusalem and pay homage to the one true God, that's an incredible fulfillment of prophecy, just you being here and standing with us. And so you have to understand that there are literally dozens, and I just picked a few examples, but all the prophecies of the Bible, all the prophecies are being fulfilled right before our very eyes. And because of this, that Jews and Christians are coming together around the world in all sorts of different activities, through sports ministries, through political caucuses. We have 38 Israelite caucuses and parliaments around the world, through the International Day of Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem and joint prayer events. Jews and Christians are working together because they see that God is real. The Bible is not a storybook. It's a real, not just historic, accurate document that we can prove through our archaeology, but also a real, accurate predictor of the future. At the same time, and this is the key to understanding the conflict in the Middle East, we have to understand that for people who don't believe in the God of Israel, who don't believe in the Bible, this is the scariest time to be alive. There is no scarier time in world history, maybe the Exodus from Egypt. But besides that, there's never been a scarier time in history if you don't believe in the Bible and you don't believe in the God of Israel. And that's why we see unprecedented attacks against Israel. Now, let's look at who's coming up against Israel, because the people coming up against Israel, they shouldn't be working together at all. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, practically, these people should either be supportive of Israel or neutral. But if you look at it from a biblical point of view, it does make sense. So who's standing against Israel? Well, we see in the university campuses some very anti-Israel rhetoric. We see some blatant anti-Semitism there. We see people standing up and saying death to Jews in Israel. We see people calling Israel an apartheid state when we're the only free democracy in the Middle East. Why? Why would these bastions of human rights and liberal ideology be against the only free democracy in the Middle East? Not only are we the only parliament in the Middle East where women have rights and can be elected to parliament, as you saw from Merav Ben-Ari, who just spoke, be parliament members, or can be the prime minister of Israel like Golda Meir was, or could be the head of the Bank of Israel, which is a current situation. But every country around here, women are treated like dogs. They can't show their face in public. They can't drive cars. They can't be educated. So why would the bastions of liberal and human rights, like universities and the media, be against the only place where women and men are equal? We serve side by side in the military. It doesn't make any sense practically. We're the only place that has freedom of religion. Not only can you pull out a Bible right now and have a prayer study, but people who are here will say, way to go, that's what you're supposed to be doing in Jerusalem. You know, if you took the same Bible to Saudi Arabia, you'd be arrested at the airport, you could be hung. It's a stiffer penalty taking a Bible in Saudi Arabia than a kilo of heroin into America. So why shouldn't people who are for human rights and values be for the only place that has freedom of religion? We have freedom of democracy. In this building, 15% of our parliament are Muslims. Some of them come to the plenum and call for the destruction of the state of Israel. No one can say a word. Freedom of speech, freedom of election, freedom of the media. We have all the freedoms that you could ever want for it. So why wouldn't they be for the one place in the Middle East with freedom and rights for all? From a practical point of view, it doesn't make sense. But from a biblical point of view, it makes perfect sense. Because you can't tell your children that there's no God and that the Bible is not true. It's just a storybook, as long as God is fulfilling his prophecies right before everyone's very eyes in Israel. And that's why they demonize Israel. How many of you heard that Israel was a dangerous place? Do you know that Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, is the safest capital, statistically, in the world? In Chicago, there were 850 murders in 2014. In Israel, in Jerusalem, including terrorist attacks, there were 6. You can't even compare. We're the safest capital in the world. You can go at midnight downtown Jerusalem, not worry for a second. Can you do that in any other capital in the world? No, of course not. But yet, if you listen to the news, they were dangerous. Why? They don't want you to see it for yourself. Stay away from there. They're bad guys there. It's scary there. It's dangerous. Once you come here, it's very clear what's going on. It's very clear it's not an apartheid state. You can go to any supermarket and see the people shopping there are Jews and Arabs, and the people working there are Jews and Arabs. Everyone has the same rights as everyone else. So how do you sell that lie if you come here and see it? You know who else is standing against Israel? Muslims. Muslim countries, as Marav just mentioned, are boycotting Israel. They're standing against Israel. They're not helping. Why? You know that 18% of our population is Muslim? They have a higher GDP than any country around here. They have free medical care like all of our citizens, free education like all our citizens. We even have affirmative action. They're only 18% of the population, but 50% of the dormitories at Hebrew U are reserved for Arab Israelis. So, forget that. What about all the other freedoms I mentioned? Freedom of election, freedom of right, freedom of worship. The other countries around should say, hey, how come we don't have freedom to elect who we want or to say what we want publicly? How come we don't have free medical care? How come we don't have a high GDP? They should emulate us, not condemn us. From a practical point of view, they should be our biggest supporters. They should say, we want the same things that Israel has in our own countries. But from a biblical point of view, it makes perfect sense why they're against us. You can't teach that the Quran is true if the Bible is true. Only one can be true. Different prophecies, different prophets, different God. So if the Bible is being fulfilled right in the heart of the Middle East, not in Oakland or Australia or London, but right here in front of everyone, how do you teach your children that the Bible is true? You have to say, no, this is just a coincidence. It's a blip in history. We're going to wipe them off the map. We're going to push them to the sea. We're going to take back Jerusalem. But of course, we know it's not the case. Another group is standing against Israel, and this is probably the most shocking of all, is mainline Christian churches. Do you know that there are mainline Christian churches that are divesting from Israel? They're saying we're not going to put any money into Israel. The only country in the Middle East that they can actually visit as clergymen. The only place that they have property rights. This building is built on land owned by the Greek Orthodox Church. We pay them rent. They have clergy visas, they have churches, they have property rights, they have freedom of movement, they have freedom to worship. The only place in the Middle East, just 2.5 hour drive down the street to Damascus, if you're a Christian, you're dead. They'll kill you. You can either pay them 13 ounces gold, protection money, which no one has. You can convert to Islam, or you can be beheaded. Those are your three options. They've murdered tens of thousands of Christians just for the fact that they're Christian. 2.5 hour drive from here in Syria. They're not divesting from Syria. No, that's okay. They divest from Israel, the only place where they can actually visit and be Christian. Well, from a practical point of view, that makes absolutely no sense. But from a biblical point of view, it makes perfect sense. Because you can't teach that the covenant between God and Abraham is over, and now there's a new covenant, and that's the only covenant. Yeah, Jerusalem was a great place at one time, but now we have Rome. As long as God is fulfilling his covenant before everyone's eyes. And if you go to a place like Brazil that in 1948 was 100% Catholic, today it's 35% Bible-believing Christian. Well, what's changed? If you ask them, they'll tell you. They say, look, we realized that we didn't replace anyone. We were grafted into the covenant. We're part of the covenant. And that's really hurting those mainline churches. So they're divesting from Israel. So you have to understand, whereas Jews and Christians who actually believe in the Bible are coming together around the world in an unprecedented burst of activity, people who don't believe in the Bible are also banding together to fight this. And this issue is really the issue of our time. It doesn't matter if you live in America or Australia or Israel. Jews and Christians need to unite to defend the covenant that God made with Abraham. They need to defend our way of life, our Judeo-Christian heritage. And that's why it's so important for what Coach Godfrey is doing. Because talking to you about this at this age is going to empower you to do things about it as you move forward. And really for you guys as youth, it's great that you're understanding this at this point, because Israel, for people of faith, is the most exciting thing out there. This is where the action is. This is where God is fulfilling his prophecies. This is where you need to be focused on. This is why God says pray for the peace of Jerusalem and not pray for the peace of other countries, because he wants you to have your focus on Jerusalem. He wants you to teach your children about Jerusalem. He wants you to teach your friends about Jerusalem. So it's a great opportunity here. And what we've been able to do is nothing short of miraculous. Because of this new alliance, and specifically because of the Trump administration, we've been able to do a lot of things to make this situation a lot better and to protect us. And the person on the front line of this whole battle, in the legislative front line, is Joe Sabag. He's our U.S. director, and he's the author of the anti-BDS legislation and the anti-Semitism legislation. And I want you all to just give him a real warm welcome, and he's going to tell you a little bit about that, and then we'll open it up to questions.
I call Washington, D.C. home now, but I'm a Miami guy, always will be. I hope that each of you is finding Israel to appeal to you on a variety of different levels, not just as a country that's here and welcoming you as foreigners, but as a country that wants to open itself up so that you find yourself actually fitting in and eventually viewing yourselves not just as supporters but actual stakeholders. Whether it's your identity as a Christian who's coming here to visit the birthplace of Jesus and your own Christian faith, whether it's as a minority person who's here visiting a country that has welcomed immigrants and refugees from over 100 different countries, where you can find people every shade that God has made here, whether it's as somebody who's interested in civil rights, understanding that Israel offers by far some of the greatest civil rights found anywhere in the world, not just here in the region: freedom of religion, free exercise of speech. This is a country that loves to overcome challenges. I think that's really one of the most defining characteristics, and challenges are something that's going to come to each of us in our lives. Many of you have challenges coming from single-parent homes. Some of us have disabilities. This is a place where we find that those challenges are actually viewed as opportunities. The opportunity to define ourselves with the character that we use to overcome those challenges. 100 years ago this week, World War I ended, and the Treaty of Paris was signed, and that began a process whereby Israel, eventually it began to take shape in a legal sense, through the San Remo Resolution, and then through the mandate process. And our United States was really central to that process, starting with the decisions of Woodrow Wilson and Herbert Hoover to get involved in the Balfour Declaration, and then eventually, to push that forward, like I said, into the League of Nations, and making the recognition of the rights of the Jewish people here in the land of Israel something concrete under international law. So I just want to talk briefly, I think getting back to Jackson's question about what can we do as Americans, and how can we get involved if we care about Israel and make this our own. Not everything that Israel is relying upon in terms of U.S. policy is happening in D.C. In fact, very little is happening in D.C. Most of the action in support of Israel is right now happening on a state-by-state basis. We've been very successful in that since 2012, we've managed to pass major pieces of pro-Israel legislation and policy in 37 states. We've done that in just 6 years, and that's because people themselves are very much desiring to get involved in making a difference, and to getting their own hands dirty, not just simply going out and expressing support for Israel, but trying to translate that into practical outcomes. So we've confronted a few challenges in the last few years. Like Josh said, one of the things that we did was develop the first specific legislation against this modern anti-Israel movement they call the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And that's gone through 26 states now. And the majority of that success has been owed to the fact that evangelical Christian folks have come out and have invested the type of support politically and in terms of advocacy that's been necessary to accumulate 26 states in just a 3-year time period. I can tell you guys that it's very much unprecedented to create such a widespread body of laws across so many states in such a short period of time. It's really a testament to the motivation of folks to actually get involved and to do something. More recently, we just passed a very unique law in South Carolina, and I know that some of the folks here have connections with Earl Cox, who was very much involved in the passage of this legislation. I imagine some of you would be surprised to know that the Civil Rights Act of 1964, in terms of providing protections to minority students on campus, doesn't apply to Jewish students. And so there are a number excuse me, shortfalls right now in the law, because at the same time, if you take a look at the type of statistics that we see, Jewish students in particular are the single most likely demographic group to be victimized as a part of hate crimes. And so, excuse me, so we passed a law that for the first time anywhere in the United States actually provides a uniform definition of anti-Semitism. And the nuance in that, of course, is the fact that anti-Jewish bigotry these days tends to be expressed in terms of Israel, where Israel itself is now the embodiment of what they would call Jew amongst the nations. So when you hear folks talking about Zionists or being pro-Israel and so on, we understand there's only one Jewish country. It's pretty obvious in general what folks are talking about. When you guys go back to campus and make your way to the university centers, you'll notice that the portrayal of Israel is very much the opposite of what you guys are seeing here in reality, is certainly the way that the country is trying to extend itself to you guys. And you guys will have your own choices to make, whether to move ahead and to get involved in trying to push back and being torchbearers for truth, or whether just to sit back and to allow that challenge to go unchecked. So, overall, I think in general, if you guys are able to take some of this motivation back, to make your way back to campus, what's very much needed right now, and I think why the country is really anxious to show you guys the truth, is that they're hoping that you guys will make your way back, not only be motivated to share these messages with your friends and family, but to actually extend the truth in places where it's uncomfortable, and where you guys are going to have to really be very determined to do so, and then ultimately look for your own means of getting involved and trying to make a difference in the world. So with that in mind, rather than just trying to continue highlighting Israel, I'd be happy to take any questions. It wasn't too long ago that I was, in the same position as most of you guys, just looking around and trying to figure out what's God's plan for me, and where can I find a sense of accomplishment and an opportunity to make a difference. So, I'm happy to talk a little bit about what I've done.
I think the most important quality when it comes to leadership is courage. And a lot of people are smart, but you can be born smart, good genes and everything. There are people who are nice and have good personalities. But I think the difference between someone who can make a difference and someone who just goes through the steps is the courage. And what we're seeing in today's world is a crisis of moral clarity. It's really out of the Bible. It's woe unto those who see good for evil and evil for good and light for darkness and darkness for light. And I think that people need to have the courage to stand up for what they know is right and wrong. And we know what right and wrong is. It comes from the Bible. The Bible tells us what's right and wrong. So we have a code of ethics. It just needs people to be people of courage to stand up and say, look, I know the truth and I'm willing to stand for it. And I think that courage is what makes the difference between a layperson and a real leader.
I can only speak from personal experience. There are a lot of things that we don't get to choose in life. We don't get to choose to be the smartest. We don't get to choose necessarily to be the strongest or the biggest or the fastest. One thing that we can choose is to be the hardest working. That is a choice that we have. So when I wake up, I try and approach it from that perspective, and in the belief that hard work ultimately will get us somewhere. I keep a quote on my desk. It's a quote from former U.S. President Calvin Coolidge. It's called "Press On," and the president spoke about perseverance, which is really, I think, for me, the key defining character that I needed to take on to be able to endure going out and trying to fight for Israel against oftentimes very difficult odds. But we understand that if we're willing to press ahead in the face of a challenge, and we're willing to fail 10 times, as long as we're willing to get up 11 and to keep fighting, I think to me that's the defining characteristic of leadership. It's helping to motivate others and to keep them motivated through that process of failure, and understanding that those failures eventually can become a component of our success. So if we choose to be the hardest working and we choose to combine that with perseverance, that oftentimes allows us to help make it the kind of world we like it to be. So I think that's, for me, the meaning I find in leadership.
Like the 12 young people that we have here to stand up. And they're all the way from ages of 15 to 29. And I would like maybe to ask you, what can they do in their community? How can they attack and help Israel, help the Jewish people?
So I would say first thing, you guys are actually on the front lines because you're students. When we take a look at what's happening at your schools and the types of things that are being said about Israel, we understand that if we tolerate these falsehoods and allow them to take root, that eventually we're going to have a generation of folks who view Israel the wrong way and are going to be willing to allow the wrong things to happen. So for you guys, if you decide to accept this challenge and to go back and to become agents for truth, you're going to first of all impact the dialogue in the place where it's most where it's happening in the most hostile way. And second of all, you're going to be able to influence the minds of all the unknowing and unsuspecting people who are caught in the middle of all this. Because 99% of the folks that you meet are not going to come to Israel. They're not going to look beyond what the headlines are telling them. And if somebody's going to reach them with the truth, it's only because you put it in front of them. And so I think you guys have an exceptional opportunity. It's not going to be left to the folks who are holding high offices and are dealing with a variety of issues. It's going to be left to you guys to go out there and educate all the unknowing and unsuspecting folks who are caught in the middle of this struggle and otherwise won't know anything about the true Israel.
Look, I think that a lot of people see youth as a disadvantage, and really it's probably the greatest advantage. When you're young, first of all, you have an energy that you don't have later on. You don't have the commitments that you do of raising a family and the familiar commitments. You have the ability to choose what you want to do and learn from the failure of others. I started very young in my career. I struck fast and hit often, and it was that momentum from when I was 15 and volunteering in a political campaign to when I was 22 and was a tank gunner in the Israeli Defense Forces, to when I was 25 and I launched the Christian Allies Caucus. That's what gave me the ability to do the things that I do today. And so I would not get too tripped up in what people are telling you can't do. Figure out what you can do, learn from people's mistakes, and start early. There's really, and it's something that Marav tried to speak about as well. People say that, when you're born into this situation or that situation, you're kind of like capped to what you can do. The world is really an open market to do anything. You can really, if you want to, you can achieve anything. And people who tell you not that you can't are lying to you, because 99% of the people just kind of go on with their lot in life, and that's why people think that. But if you go and you say, I want to do this and start early at it, you'll have a huge advantage on other people. And I think that being here at such a young age and seeing really what's right and what's wrong gives you an ability to have the confidence in doing something at such a young age. So that's why I think it's such a great initiative.